We have been churning out content all off season long, and now that the season is actually here, I want to look back at 6 players I have been buying all off season and will continue to buy into the start of 2024. My first player is Kyler Murray, and look, we've talked about him a lot. Myself, Addison, we've covered Kyler ad nauseum this offseason, it feels like, and I'm probably going to keep doing it. I know Addison's going to do the same. He's 26 years old. He's coming off the board as QB 11 right now. That's just not, that's not where his value should be. Kyler Murray has shown us when fully healthy, he can be a top 5 quarterback. He can be a top 6, top 7 guy. Like, that's where he should be. And I mean, you look at his age and it's just, he's nowhere near the peak of his ability. He is learning, growing, not physically, but mentally. Yes, like we've seen the points per game drop over the last couple of years, right? If you look back to 2020, Kyler averaged 26 points per game. 2021, he averaged 24 points per game. Okay, but 2022, he tears the ACL, still averaged over 20 a game. And then coming back from the ACL in 2023, again, playing a shortened season, not fully healthy, at least from like a fantasy rushing perspective, he averaged 20 points per game still. The floor for Kyler, even in the worst case scenario, is 20 points per game. That is a top 12 quarterback most seasons, if not all seasons. The fact that you're paying low QB1 prices for a guy that is going to put up, at worst, low QB1 performances, that's great. And when you're projecting long-term with Kyler, because that's what we care about in a rebuild, the situation is set up for Kyler to succeed. Not only is he going to be 2 years removed from the ACL tear in 2024, you add Marvin Harrison Jr. You have another season now with an elite tight end in Trey McBride. You have James Conner. You have Trey Benson. So when you look at 2025, all of those pieces are going to remain. This offensive line continues to improve. Kyler's only, hopefully, going to get healthier. Basically, Kyler's going to have top 5 upside. I mean, 2025 and beyond, like that is his sweet spot. And I'm buying him in redraft, I'm buying him on contenders, and I'm definitely buying him on rebuilders because there is so much room for him to gain value moving forward. Dak Prescott. And the last time I put out a video talking about contenders, I talked about Dak Prescott. Back in May, he was off the board as QB 17. Now, that price has not held. Obviously, I think everybody's started to realize what Dak Prescott actually is going to do this season. But even now, as of July, he is off the board as QB 13. He's only 30 years old. He is not near the end of his career. He doesn't even feel like he's near like a production cliff. If we just look at his last 4 seasons, Dak Prescott is in his prime, right? If you go back to 2020, he played a very, very short season, but in that time frame, he was the QB1 in points per game. And you go to 2021, he's the QB7 in points per game. Now, 2022, objectively bad year for Dak, right? QB 16, under 20 points per game, not what you want to see. He bounces back in 2023, finishes as the QB2. Now, objectively, to be fair and just tell the whole picture, it was a down year for quarterbacks in general, right? He was under 24 points per game. But the point remains, how often do you find a quarterback that is routinely going to be a top 10 quarterback in points per game that is available for less than QB1 prices? And when you look at the situation he's currently in, like this season, the Cowboys are going to have to throw a ton. We've talked about this at length. I have mentioned this in several different videos. They don't have a real solid running game at all. You have Rico Dowdle, undrafted free agent a couple years back. You have the ghost of Ezekiel Elliott, who I still think is an interesting value. But there's not much else. You have Deuce Vaughn, Malik Davis. What are you going to do? You're not going to be able to run the ball consistently here. If they want to win games, it's going to be on the back or, honestly, the arm of Dak Prescott. So basically, you could be looking at career-high passing numbers for Dak Prescott. That alone is going to obviously let him finish top 10, but he really does have a path to finish as a top 5 quarterback this year, just because they're going to need him to do that if the Cowboys want to be interesting whatsoever. So Dak Prescott, you don't have to pay QB1 prices necessarily, but he just feels like the perfect target for a cheap contender. It's Breece Hall. And yes, like obviously you want Breece Hall as a contender, but I just want to talk about it a little bit more. He's the RB3 in ADP. He's 23 years old. And last season, when he actually got fully healthy, was actually a full-time player, so week 5 on, he averaged over 20 points per game on an offense that did not have Aaron Rodgers, that had offensive line concerns, had just a million different issues, and he was coming back from an ACL tear. Like it was literally, I think, one of the most impressive seasons I've seen in a very long time. He's now 2 years removed. They are adding Aaron Rodgers, hopefully staying healthy. I mean, even Aaron Rodgers isn't vintage Rodgers, which I don't think he's going to be. He's better than whatever the hell the Jets have been throwing out there the last couple of seasons. Breece Hall is one of the very few elite running backs in the NFL at this point, one of the true workhorses, and is a legitimate dark horse to finish as the overall RB1 in Dynasty, or overall RB1 just in the season for 2024. If you can tear back from Christian McCaffrey, if you can tear back from Bijan Robinson and just take Breece, I think that's fine because I think he's as talented, if not better, than both of those running backs. Now, I said let's buy Tyjae Spears when he was valued at RB15 before free agency because I didn't expect the Tony Pollard ad. I'm still going to buy Tyjae Spears now that he's dropped in price. He's the RB23 coming off the board, 23 years old, and there is so much room for growth with Tyjae Spears. Starting off with the Tony Pollard thing here, right? There's potential for him to be the 1A by the end of the season, even with Tony Pollard in the backfield. Tony Pollard, 27, going on 28 next season, which, again, as a rebuilder, I care more about 2025 than I do 2024. Tyjae Spears has the chance to not only be the 1A, but be the true workhorse back heading into the 2025 season. Tony Pollard coming off of a less than spectacular year, and I think just getting older and older. Tyjae Spears' youth, I think, ultimately is going to win out here. The skill set and the talent is why I'm interested in a potential backup running back for this season. Even last year, alongside Derrick Henry, Tyjae Spears hit benchmarks that I care about tremendously for running backs. He averaged over a 12% target share. That is an enormous piece when you're looking at the upside of a running back. There were 10 running backs to see at least a 14% target share last year. 80% of them were top 24 in points per game, and 50% of them were top 12 on the season. That's the type of ceiling Tyjae Spears has. Now, he's obviously going to need to win the workload, and there is certainly risk here. But given how cheap running backs have gotten, a low-end RB2 price tag in Dynasty is not what it used to be. So Tyjae Spears at that price is absolutely worth the gamble on a rebuilding roster. Now into the wide receivers here. The first one, it's Rashee Rice. It's the felon, the criminal. Wide receiver 39 in ADP though. The value is spectacular. Only 23 years old. Again, as a rebuilder, cheap and young. Fantastic. Exactly the two of the things I want. I think adding Xavier Worthy, adding Hollywood Brown did not help him from a value perspective. But the fact that there is a looming unknown suspension coming as well, right? Is it 6 games? Is it 8? Is it a full season? We do not know. I still think that suspension is coming in 2024. If it does, I don't care as a rebuilding roster. That's why I think Rashee Rice is so interesting, right? Being able to buy a player that is cheap and talented, because you just don't care what they do this year, is almost a luxury. Now, unfortunately, that luxury is there because you're not going to win a title, so that sucks. But 2025 and beyond, assuming the suspension is out of the way, Rashee Rice is great. He was a great wide receiver last year. When you look at what he did, right, finished the year with an 18% target share. That's fine, right? Nothing spectacular. But that was on a 61% route participation. That is nothing. That's barely, you're a part-time player. Rashee Rice this season should be a full-time wide receiver playing near 100% of the snaps. That is the expectation when he's on the field, right? Before the bye week last year, he averaged 13 points per game, and that's, again, not running a ton of routes. Back half of the year, post-bye, 17 points per game. That's when he became a full-time player. Now, you may not think that type of production is sustainable when you introduce Xavier Worthy, you introduce Hollywood Brown, right? And that's fair. But at wide receiver 39, there is so much space for him to be better than a wide receiver 4. Like there is a ton of room for you to be wrong on the ceiling and have him still pay off at the current price a year from now. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a proven wide receiver, and that's T. Higgins, right? T. Higgins now off the board as wide receiver 23. 2 years ago, he was being drafted as a top 10 wide receiver. He was the wide receiver 9 in startup ADP. And, it made sense because he was tied to Joe Burrow. He had fantastic production. And then 2022 and 2023 happen, where you just have not seen T. Higgins fully healthy, right? He's only played 21 games, over 60% of snaps. That's not enough. It's just not. It's very difficult to be considered an elite wide receiver or a borderline elite wide receiver when you're not playing as often as you should, or you're leaving games early consistently. That's the problem with T. Higgins. And it also doesn't help that his quarterback's been injured. All around, the situation has not been kind to T. Higgins. But when he does play over 60% of snaps over the last 2 seasons, he averages 16 points per game. It's not a skill issue. Like, T. Higgins, when he's on the field, is dominant. He is a borderline wide receiver 1. Hands down. And the thing with T. Higgins is, it feels like he's older. I don't know why. It feels like T. Higgins should be 27. He's not. He's 25 years old for the entire 2024 season. T. Higgins is not near the end of his career. He's just starting to fade in Dynasty because we're reactionary. People are very reactionary. If you don't produce like we expect you to do, there's almost always a ding. And he had back-to-back down seasons. That's enough for people to say, yeah, you're not a wide receiver 1. And look, he shouldn't be ranked as a wide receiver 1. I think the price is fair. It's just that when I can get a guy of his caliber as the wide receiver 23, I'm going to pull the trigger. I think it just makes too much sense. And when we look forward, he's probably out of Cincinnati after this year, and that means he gets paid. He has a chance to be a true number 1 wide receiver. Maybe he ends up with Drake May in New England, right? Him and Jalen Polk, I think, would be an interesting duo. So, look, he's not in this situation forever. If he can string together a healthy season, T. Higgins is going to look like a discount next year.